These days, being a college athlete is completely different than what it used to be. That's thanks to the name, image, and likeness rule, or NIL. Now student athletes can be paid for autographs, personal appearances, and merchandise, among other things. Some people believe athletes should be paid through more than just NIL payments. A survey from Sportico finds 70% of adults believe college athletes should be able to receive direct compensation from their school. So should they or shouldn't they? Well, we're going to get into that right now with former Detroit Lion Herman Moore and CEO of the league group, Mark S. Lee. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning. All right, Mark, let's start with you. Where do you stand on this issue? Should college athletes be paid straight up?
My position has shifted over the last several years, the last couple of years, and I think, quite frankly, they should be. It's for these college athletes, particularly football players and other athletes, it's a full-time job, quite frankly. I was one in the camp years ago. Okay, they got the scholarships to go on to college, some type of scholarship, athlete, and they should be beneficial to accept that reality. But the reality is that the market has shifted, the economic landscape has shifted, and I think they should be. The NCAA is a $1.5 billion business right now.
A lot of money in the NCAA for sure. All right, Herman, you played college football at Virginia. What are your thoughts on the issue? I'm sure when you were a young man, a few extra bucks in your pocket would have gone a long way.
Well, I can first and foremost tell you this. The largest payment I ever received was a Pell Grant for $500, and that was per semester. So as you can imagine, that didn't go very far. I will say this. There should be compensation, knowing what I know, even about managing my brand post-collegiate career, post-NFL career. There's a lot of money that's being made in other markets and other places that there is no compensation that's being shared with those that are helping to generate that. And to Mark's point, a lot has shifted, but it's been in the process for quite some time, to where there's hundreds of millions of dollars being generated, and yet that doesn't flow back down. So the compensation scale and those things are completely different. And I also will say this, it's different. If you look at us as athletes, I wanted to go into the criminal justice system. And if I want to do something that requires a little bit more time to take advantage of that scholarship at a higher level, I can't, because it may be time prohibitive for me to do that. So your options are less. You're pushed into certain areas that may not be as profitable or as advantageous at the end of your collegiate career. So therefore, I definitely believe it's not equal. They're continuing to make money on our name, image, and likeness post career. And there's so much merch, and there's social media. They get paid for content creation and all these other areas where they can generate revenue. And it's all off of those athletes.
Herman, strictly from the point of being a student athlete, do you think if you were getting paid, it would affect your performance, or maybe even more importantly, affect your studies in a certain way?
No, I don't think it does. It doesn't change the landscape of the time. If you think of it now, you're not going to be asked to do more. I think there would be a few other distractions. There are things that anytime you place something like the NIL and you're giving opportunities for different distractions to occur, when you offer that, you need to make sure that there are other things in place that will allow the athletes and the student athletes to still take advantage of the opportunity of that college provides. So I think there's a balance that needs to be struck. There's a lot that's been put around just the money aspect of it versus looking at how do we put systems in place to also support this new change that has happened that allows for each to be profitable, to make money, and it could be a mutually beneficial thing for all parties.
All right, Mark, so the NIL payments have been around for a couple of years now, but I don't think we've totally seen the full effect of how that's going to affect college sports. If you look forward to college athletes being paid directly compensated, how do you think that will affect the landscape of college sports?
Yeah, I think that you're going to find the big schools, right, the big brands, for example, will continue to attract the top-notch athletes. Don't get me wrong, they're going to the other individual schools as well. But the big branded schools will continue to attract those athletes who want to go to the Michigans, the Ohio States, the UCLAs, the USCs. And so I think the power shift is going to continue to shift as a direct result of players being paid, because they can go to a program like a Michigan or a Michigan State and somehow get some compensation. For example, real quick, University of Maryland, an interesting story, the coach at the University of Maryland, he said he was out recruiting a football player, a running back who would be at best the third best running back on the football team. And this running back asked him, hey, can I get $100,000 in NIL? Remember, the third string running back, not the first or the second string. So you will see a continued shift in the overall landscape.
Yeah, that's amazing. A third string quarterback or running back can get that. Amazing. You know, Herman, I've heard stories. I was reading something about Caitlin Clark, the star women's basketball player at Iowa. She decided to stay an extra year in college, an extra year of eligibility, because she can make more from NIL than playing in the WNBA. I mean, as an athlete, a pro athlete and a former college athlete, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, extending your college career, what's that do for the college brand?
I think there's a benefit that happens on both levels. For Caitlin, she's going to have the opportunity to continue doing something she's passionate about. That is helping her move forward in her career. I mean, the reason we go to college is to get off to a great career, to have a great start in our next path of life. But sometimes if you're given these type of opportunities, it helps to accelerate that. So I say it's good for her to be able to do that. If the opportunity presents itself, it's good for the university to be able to leverage that as well and continue to provide assets that will help its athletic program and also its student body at large. So I don't have a problem with it. I just, again, think that if you look at the transition that we talk about professional athletes having, leaving one profession and going to another, we get off to a slower start, a later start. Same happens in the collegiate sports. They're not allowed to go out and have a lot of jobs and a lot of other things that are afforded to the other students that allow them to accelerate their next stage in life.
All right, let's talk about the NCAA. Mark kindly briefly touched on this about the recruiting, Herman. Is there a danger if money is starting to get paid that the large schools, the big schools, the traditional schools will get all the talent? Or do they have to put in some kind of, not a salary cap, but an equal salary distribution to keep it a competitive landscape?
No, I don't think so. And I'm going to go out a little bit and say, look at what Brad Holmes and these guys did. They didn't necessarily get all the first round draft picks, and they've turned them into great players. I think there's an opportunity to develop these high school athletes into great collegiate athletes during that time at the universities and at the colleges. So I don't think there's a guarantee just because you're giving those top talents. We know that doesn't always necessarily transfer over into being championships, but I do think it gives you a competitive advantage on the recruiting landscape. It does become a distraction, in my opinion, because now you're out trying to negotiate with those that aren't ready to be negotiated. They don't have agents and all these things that help bring that conversation back into the stratosphere, back into our atmosphere. So it's a tough deal.
Yeah, and Mark, how does that change the school's perspective on things? I mean, you have athletic directors now. Do you have to have called quote-unquote general managers now to manage contracts if this happens in the future?
That's something for the athletic directors they need to address. That's going to be an issue. I would say that there's a potential cost to the university, right? People are asking, well, who's going to get this money? Yes, we know there are TV contracts. We know that the NCAA is a billion-dollar business right now, $1.5 billion business. But in preparation for this conversation, I talked to a couple of people, and then what they indicated was some universities might, in fact, continue to raise tuition to cover the cost. So the cost of tuition might increase as a result of this. So there are a lot of factors that will need to be taken into account as this becomes reality, if in fact that's the case. But Herman, real quick question for you before I forget. Does that mean these players, in theory, to Chris's point, do they have to have agents at the collegiate level to negotiate these deals?
Given the way everything is going, and it's a little still loose, in my opinion, this is a contract. It becomes something that affects you in perpetuity. We're talking about using your name, your image, your likeness. We're talking about who gets and who's granted rights to that branding as you go out and start to establish that, and who has access to that content that can continue to monetize it. Players don't get an opportunity to keep using those entities' logos and their things without a license. So what allows it to be done the other way? So there's a lot of things that have not been really addressed because they're looking at the high level based on the business side of it for the universities and the NCAA, but they're not really looking at how to protect those players and also them, not just short term, but long term.
And there's still a lot to consider. Now, Herman, if you were to put a time frame on this, what do you think the likeliness of players getting direct compensation for playing is?
I think it's not far off. I mean, is it next year? Is it a few years down the road? It's hard to say, but I will say this. I think there is a path forward for that. I think it just needs to be put into a place where you don't have to have it so lopsided. That's what keeps it to being a problem when you look at how do you get something beneficial for both parties. someone always feels like they have to be at the top of the chain. But until that happens, I think it's just going to continue to be somewhat of a broken system.
Always interesting times when you talk about the NCAA.
Yeah.
Herman Moore, Mark Esteli, thanks a lot for coming in today and talking about this.
Thank you.
Time for a quick break
Pleasure.
here on CBS News at 7. We'll be back in a few minutes.